mean, there are some opportunities to learn some interesting things and for students to think about things, but I think you're right. I think that the treatment of this book is, entertainment, exaggeration, imagination, fun. It has a little bit more of a spirit of fun.
That's right. Yeah, I think if you just approach it as reading one of our typical literature books, you're going to miss out on that because it's obvious that this is not real life. Yeah, so what has been one of your favorite third grade novels?
Well, I love the Moffats. I mean, I've talked about the Moffats several times in a lot of our other episodes, and I just love Jane, and I love that sunny attitude of those children. And as a mother, I just love those children, their friendship with each other and their loyalty to each other. So I think it's just a charming book that's maybe underestimated in a lot of ways. What do you think? What's your favorite?
I honestly think my favorite is one that is not actually deep and not, Farmer Boy and Charlotte's Web. There's so much meat there, but honestly, I think my favorite character of all is Paddington Bear. I love Paddington, and I was thinking about this yesterday when I was in the editing department. And I said something, that we were going to change from Down the Hill or something. And all of a sudden, all the editors, they just got quiet and everybody's looking at me with dread on their faces.
Yeah, because we have to fix everything.
And then Ian jumps up and heads my way. And Kaylee's like up at attention. And I thought, I'm like Paddington Bear. He creates total chaos around himself and doesn't really know it.
Yeah.
Doesn't anticipate that he's creating chaos. And that was me yesterday, standing in the middle. And I do it all the time. I'll just make some offhand comment about something that happened down the hill, and all of a sudden everybody's like, "Oh,
what curriculum manual does this need to go into?" Yeah.
So maybe I just have this relationship with Paddington because I see that he's so well-meaning. I'm well-meaning. I just want the curriculum to be as good as it can be.
You just can't verbalize ideas that you don't want to act on. That needs to be your lesson.
That's true. That's true.
Or that you're still contemplating. Just
and see, that's
contemplate internally.
That's where we sometimes don't know.
No.
Is this a real idea?
I cannot believe you are criticizing me for this.
That's true.
Of all people.
That's true. That's true. I say everything that's in my head.
Yes, whether it's feasible or not.
That's true.
Okay, so we may be two peas in a pod.
Yeah, you are.
Ian, what's your favorite?
I think it's Charlotte's Web. I mean, I hadn't read that book. I don't know if I ever read that book, but I hadn't read it at least in years or even watched the movie.
And really, you hadn't read any of the third grade books.
Most of these I haven't read because, some of them are books that I just wasn't interested in as a kid.
And your children aren't old
and they're
enough
not
yet
old
for
enough.
them.
Yeah. But I just, for me, a book that causes me to cry is a good book. I mean, I like to cry at books. I do. But Charlotte's Web, I was just sitting in the office reading it and getting to the end and just, in tears, like absolutely in tears.
That's sweet.
And just, the sense of like what it is to be home, was so powerful because I do have two young children and the home is a developing thing for us. My wife and I have been married for a while and we had our own home, but now we have a different home and it's growing. And so, yeah, there was quite a bit of good stuff in Charlotte's Web for me. So that leads us to one of our next third grade books, which is Mr. Popper's Penguins, which admittedly is often very absurd. So what is it that you guys like about this book? What is it doing for us?
The whole thing is a farce. It's funny. There's nothing realistic about it. All the characters are larger than life. And the circumstances are larger than life. And it's almost like, this book was written in 1938. So, it was before we really had all the TV that we have and movies and where a story like this would just be a comedy.
Yes.
And so,
yeah.
So I feel like the Atwaters
humor.
have managed to do that without all that media, like they did it without the influence of all of that media. And I think that's really something to be able to bring a book alive like that, all the farcical things that happen, and it's nonsensical.
And it's, I mean, there are some opportunities to learn some interesting things and for students to think about things. But I think you're right. I think that the treatment of this book is, entertainment, exaggeration, imagination, fun. It has a little bit more of a spirit of fun.
That's right. Yeah, I think if you just approach it as reading one of our typical literature books, you're going to miss out on that because it's obvious that this is not real life.
And it's not deep. There aren't deep themes here because it is so over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Yeah, who's going to let penguins live in their living room with their windows open in the
that's
middle of
right.
winter? Yeah.
I mean, it's literally just pure entertainment and enjoyment, and there should be a lot of laughter. And I think it's really on a level that even young students will need to be guided to see that this is a farce. But once you've done that, I think they can easily see the humor in it, where a lot of our books, we say, adults see humor where children don't. I think this one was really written on their level to appreciate the fact, that you would get a penguin in a box and then fix your drill holes in your freezer.
Well, and I think what you just said is one of the values of the book is that most books, like you said, maybe the adults find the humor in it, but I think with this book, there's that reversal. And it's obvious, I think, yes, you may need to point it out to students, but I think students can also probably laugh at something more quickly than we can because we're looking for something deeper.
Right.
Some kind of mystical meaning in the book.
Some lesson, right?
But no, this is comedy.
The parents are, Mr. Popper especially is such a character. I think students will recognize, that he's an unusual father.
That's right.
And an unusual husband. And that he, the things that he does, like going into debt to make the basement.
That's right. To add an ice maker.
Skating rink whatever he's done to that with piles of snow, and the whole family sitting in their house in overcoats because the penguins
and they accept it joyfully.
Right. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, it's all the exaggeration is freely accepted by everybody. Now the town looks a little askance at it, but they even come around. The handyman becomes afraid and leaves when he sees the penguin in the house. So it is like this family by themselves is a little odd.
Mm-hmm.
But they take on this project together. So that makes it, I think, enjoyable. I mean, one of the comments that I liked in this book when Captain Cook is building his nest, Mrs. Popper says, well, he is, going to be quite a help around the house because he's picking everything up.
Actually cleaning.
Yeah. So, there are some funny little, nice glances at perspective on that.
That's right. And I think characterization, Mr. Popper is an interesting character.
Right.
But even so, he's still relatable because he's a man who desires adventure. And this is, I think, something that we've talked about before is this is, if anything, kind of an introduction to adventure. Yes, they go on the adventure of taking the penguins across the US. But Mr. Popper has never left his home. And so there is that experience that he's having of leaving, but he really wants to go somewhere exotic.
But why? Because he reads books.
That's right. That's right.
And that's a huge theme coming up in the curriculum. I mean, we're going to start looking at adventure in a lot of our books, but also in a more serious way. So, you talk about The Hobbit and Bilbo's adventure, and then Wind in the Willows, and you get a stark contrast between a noble adventure and a worthwhile adventure for your friends and sort of a reckless adventure that's a selfish, prideful adventure. And so we're going to see this spirit of adventure and, how it diverges on kind of two paths and two motives. But just the idea of, we've talked so much about home and rootedness. And so this book is great because it really shines a light on, going out and, experiencing the world and, wondering what's out there. And so I think Popper does a great job of, introducing that.
Yeah, and it talks about geography, history. You get to see coast to coast and then the differences between the poles and whether penguins are at the South Pole only, or
Right.
the whole point is to get penguins to the North Pole. So
Right.
there's quite a lot of connections to things that students can go on and investigate and actually learn.
And one of the things I really love about this book is that Mr. Popper initiated all of this excitement and adventure in his life by writing a simple letter.
Yes.
I mean, he took initiative and, something interested him, Admiral Drake, and he just wrote him a letter.
Yeah.
And so, and then to have Admiral Drake speaking to him directly in his radio announcement.
Which is a great scene.
Yeah, isn't that great?
It
Right. Can you imagine sitting? But I think that's wonderful to demonstrate, if you're interested in something, take initiative and pursue it.
That's right.
And then, the same thing with Greta coming to the family home. The same thing. He wrote a letter. He needed help in that situation. So he wrote a letter to the Mammoth City Aquarium and so I think that's a great example to point out to students.
And we do write friendly letters.
We do.
Every year our
That's
students
right.
write friendly letters.
That's right.
And they can write them in cursive.
They certainly can. And it's readable.
Yeah.
Unlike Ian's and my
We have
handwriting.
terrible handwriting.
I feel like too that when Captain Cook, the first penguin,
That's right.
gets, and that's a lesson too, to study who is Captain Cook. Why did he name him Captain Cook?
Yeah, those
When-
illusions are nice.
They
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
They're all through here. But when Captain Cook gets ill, and Mr. Popper is so sad about it. When Mr. Popper is until now been just totally accepting of everything, just whatever comes his way, and now all of a sudden he's got a penguin, so he needs a rope so he can use it as a leash and take him for a walk. And he starts dressing like the penguin. It's all just funny. But then there's the scene when he's sick and he's afraid that he's going to die, and he says, all the Poppers had grown terribly fond of the funny, solemn little chap, and Mr. Popper's heart was frozen with terror. It seemed to him that his life would be very empty if Captain Cook went away. That's we've dealt with Charlotte's Web and the death of Charlotte, and we're going to do Lassie, which is a rough journey that ends fine, but it's rough. But there's a lot of these animal stories where we see loss or suffering. And so I think this is one that is humorous, but it's got just that touch of what it would be like to lose a pet. And that, I think, is very good for this age level, because that's something that a lot of students have experienced or will experience. And, the fear of having a sick animal. And so I think, there are some little sweet moments in here where, when Mr. Popper decides to send the penguins off, even though he could have another adventure with them and go to Antarctica or go to Hollywood and make movies and keep them with him and continue on his own adventure. But he knows that what's best for the penguins is to go back to their climate. And so he selflessly makes the decision to allow them to do that because it's the best for them. So, there are moments in here, even though it is really and larger than life.
And I think that's a great lesson to teach students, is that books worth reading aren't always these really deep, heavy books. I mean, we might really enjoy a Woodhouse
That's
short
right.
story, a Jeeves
That's a
and
great
Wooster
comparison. That's right.
But even so, usually there's something worth getting from them. And sometimes it is just enjoyment. Sometimes you need just the pleasure of reading a really funny story. But here, what I like about this is, yes, it's funny, it's farcical, but every now and then, I liked what you said, you get a touch of the real, and look for that.
And the other thing that we didn't mention is they're concerned about money, and that that was always, he's a house painter and it's seasonal. And so their family is concerned. Well, he doesn't seem too concerned. He literally is just living
Which
his
lends
life.
to his kind of farcical character.
That's right.
He's just,
That's right. But his wife is very concerned about the food in the refrigerator. It's like, okay, the penguin's coming to move in, but that's okay because there's less food in the refrigerator now anyway, because there's no money coming in. And then they borrow money to take care of the penguins. And then when they get the traveling job, they get a big
$5,000 a
first
week.
check.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's exorbitant.
That is exorbitant in
Yeah.
1938.
Yeah.
And the first thing they do is pay off their debts. So, it's that work ethic that was dominant then, even though, this is 1938. This is right after the Depression or the tail end of the Depression.
They're still in it, but they're coming out of it as World War II looms in the distance.
Yes. Yeah. So you need to put it in that perspective too. And third graders they're not going to know that. You've got to tell them what life was like. And really, when we do the Moffats, that's where they really get an idea of what life for children their age would have been like, and right between the Depression and the war.
Right. And that's it. I mean, I think there's a lot of connection, I think, between Popper and the Moffats and, the children and just sort of their sunny attitudes about things, but also just, in the Moffats, they call it hard times, which is, just an anxiety about. And then we see that again in Lassie.
Yes.
And, in some of these books that, there are
Heidi.
big worries, there are heavy burdens on these families.
Yes.
And so, I think that this is a gentle way to introduce that. But something that you were talking about Mr. Popper being a painter. And again, I love the little small comments, but his daughter calls him an artist. And I love that.
Yes.
I love that. I just think that is so charming.
Because in his absent-minded way,
Yeah.
he accidentally painted two colors in one kitchen.
And it became
Yeah.
the
woman
rage.
And
loved
it's
it.
right.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love just the appreciation and just the exaltation of his work. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think that's a great character moment, because so many of our favorite characters in literature are the kind of outcast characters, or it's the Sidney Carton in A Tale of Two Cities who just can't get things right, who becomes this beautiful
hero, right.
hero at the end, So we love those oddballs.
Yeah.
And they're good for us because most of us are in some way an oddball.